Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an insane Karen threw my child out of his wheelchair and pushed him into the road. She claimed that his disability is not real. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. So first off, this is not a story I expected that I'd ever be sharing publicly, and despite the grievances and issues I'm going to mention, I want to remain completely anonymous to avoid any backlash on my family or Karen's. While I hate her for what she did, I'm happy with the outcome and she got what she deserved. So with that in mind, this is why the demon lady in the neighborhood attacked my disabled son last month. So it all started about a year ago. My son Jacob had just turned 7 years old and we were hosting a birthday party for him in the yard. It was a typical party on a typical day, the sun was bright and burned in the summer heat, and then suddenly I hear that Jacob had collapsed outside while playing football. I didn't take it seriously at the time because kids tended to trip or push each other often. An hour later we were set in the hospital after we were unable to wake him up. Jacob woke sometime the next morning, oblivious to what had happened. The doctor explained it as short-term amnesia from a concussion, but found no cause for his fall. Hoping it to be a one-off, we took him home and he fell again. After running some more tests, a different, better doctor told us that he had early signs of fibromyalgia, not fatal but very much life-altering. The happy and energetic young boy would now face fatigue and pain with barely any notice, while we could do our best to put on smiles for him. We knew his life would never be the same again. We took Jacob home later that afternoon despite urges to keep him in for more tests and treatment. He hated the idea of being left alone in the hospital and we felt awful leaving him there. The doctors told us the transition to regular life might be hard, but we were not expecting him to struggle on the short stairs that he would fly up and down daily before. After a long discussion with my wife, we decided to move. While improvements could be made to this house, it was already falling apart and we thought it may be a good opportunity to place ourselves closer to the hospital as well. We snapped up the second house we saw, and while it lacked the disabled access, it was a much nicer place than our old digs. My wife stayed with Jacob while I hired and helped contractors to fit a wheelchair slope to the front door and a stair lift inside. The first few weeks of the moving/renovation process was very hectic, leaving little time to even rest or meet the new neighbors. However, that did not stop neighbors from popping by occasionally, no doubt curious about all the noise. Curiosity aside, they were all very sympathetic when I explained why we were moving, and it was heartwarming to hear that we had local support if we needed help in the future. We moved into the house as soon as we could, and my son was delighted with the access. The hospital had recommended near constant wheelchair use for the first few months since his collapse, but now he was able to go anywhere he wanted in the house without any trouble or aid, especially because the wheelchair was electric, so getting around was comfortable for him. All that came crashing down when Karen returned from her vacation. Other neighbors had mentioned her absence and that she was quite a character, but no one warned me about the crap storm that she could cause. The first time I met the woman, she was shambling around my yard like a fat zombie. She even had the nerve to get offended when I left my house to ask what she was doing on my yard. She seemed lost and my concern was genuine, but she replied with disgust and the typical "Do you know who I am?" kind of line that set me up for a cold war with this vile woman. After an awkward silence, she directed her outrage instead towards my property, pointing out the ugly ramp and silly handrails that made my home look like a budget retirement home. I suppose the thought on why I had these changes done had not crossed her mind, as when I mentioned they were for my disabled son, she looked even more shocked. I wrongly assumed that she knew she said something wrong and would be quick to apologize. Instead though, she doubled down on her discrimination. Karen claimed in her brief rant that the neighborhood was better without us and we made it look ugly with being there. She stormed off afterwards, but I knew I had not seen the last of her yet. A week later, I had nearly forgotten the whole horrible experience until Karen reared her ugly head and pointed her nose in our business again. This time confronting my family instead. What makes matters worse is that I was not even home at the time and did not find out that this happened until much later. My wife and son like to go to the park every Friday afternoon after school. We got my son a dog as an early birthday present in an attempt to lift his mood lately. It also helped to encourage him out of the house occasionally and be seen as more than just a frail creature. While at the park, I was told they were approached by a scary older woman who claimed to be their neighbor. This neighbor, Karen, had seen my son get up from his wheelchair and had nearly leaped over the field to say that he was caught in the act. She went on to claim that he was not disabled enough to need a wheelchair and that he should stop faking it. My son sheepishly sat back down and the pair left quickly, luckily not followed. It's been hard to get my son outside since he was publicly harassed often, but after some very careful coaxing, he did reluctantly agree a few days later. In our yard was better than not outside at all. I thought wrong though. I was preparing lunch when my wife came in for a drink. We tried to keep an eye on him at all times, but in this case, we were away for maybe 5 minutes at most. During that interval, we heard shouting from outside and went out to see if our son was okay. We did not expect him to be in trouble, but we did not want him worried if other neighbors were arguing or fighting in the street. This scene we came out to was straight out of a nightmare. Karen stood in our yard, our dog was missing, and our son's wheelchair was upturned and he was lying motionless on the street. Karen, who had previously been looming over the wheelchair, now turned sharply and began to stomp away. I caught up with her while my wife rushed to our son. Karen claimed ignorance at the cause, saying that she was just talking with the little boy when he collapsed, and at first I wanted to believe her. Another neighbor then joined in to say that he had seen her shouting and pushed him over, which set her into a frenzy. Karen denied the assault but said that she was just trying to encourage him to stand since she saw earlier that he did not need the wheelchair. Given my son's injuries, witnesses and evidence, I asked my wife to quietly call the cops. Karen tried to return home multiple times, but I kept her attention by letting her shout and scream about her rights. The police were quick to arrive. I thought it was good luck until Karen's antics had quietly drawn a crowd on the other side of the street, who all gawked from behind their recording mobile phones. To top it off, there were also a number of poorly hidden onlookers in windows and doorways across the neighborhood that were watching us like a soap drama. Members from one house began to approach the scene, a male teen and a scruffy elder who began to argue for Karen's freedom after identifying themselves as Karen's family. To my relief, their protests were largely ignored until they too were threatened with arrest, which caused them to slink away. I followed the police to the station to make my statement, but as time passed, I felt my anger lessen into a gentle simmer. I hesitated, but in the end I followed through with my gut and pressed charges, not out of revenge or something, but to stop her hurting other people if set free. Karen pled guilty to harassment and assault with intent to cause bodily harm. Because of her admittance and supposed remorse, they were lenient and lowering her sentence to just 2 years. And the next one is a revenge story about a landlord. I had a landlord in the past who slipped a 90-day notice requirement into the rental contract after I had signed it. I was house hunting, so at the end of my lease I asked to go to a month-to-month lease to make it easier to leave when the time came. Landlord and I agreed on a higher monthly price to compensate them for the lack of security, and I signed the contract at the office of a business they also owned downstairs. The landlord was not actually present, but one of their employees handled it. So then the contract is signed and they go to make a copy for my records, but are having an issue with the copier. After a few minutes, they ask if they can text me when they get it to work. I naively agree and head upstairs. 30 minutes or so later, they text me saying that they got the copier to work and I can come pick up my copy. I did not think to double check everything at the time, so for the next few months I just pay my monthly rent while I look for a home. Finally found the right place and the closing date was about 4 weeks out, so I immediately notified my landlord that I would be leaving on said date. The landlord responds that it's nice that I found a home, but I would be responsible for the next 2 months' rent after that as well due to the 90-day notification requirement in the contract. I'm totally confused now, so I go check my copy of the contract and sure enough, there's a stipulation in there about that. I also noticed that my initials from the top and bottom of each page, verifying that I've read that page, have somehow mysteriously shifted to being doubled up at the top of the page after the stipulation, with none on the bottom of that actual page. This was because they had inserted 2 lines of text detailing the 90-day reporting requirement after I had already signed the paperwork. They did not notice the formatting error it created, which was a dead giveaway of what was going on. I informed the landlord of this and notify him that this is not a legally binding contract due to this issue, and state that I will not be paying any further rent beyond this month and expect my deposit back without penalty. Unfortunately, he persists with stating that this is a legally binding contract and he will pursue it in court in addition to withholding my deposit if I fail to pay. And well, I know I'm legally in the right, but I don't want to have to deal with courts to settle it, as that takes forever, so I come up with an alternative plan. The one thing he had not thought about was the fact that the contract included all utilities, as the unit did not have separate meters and did not have any language forbidding excessive use of them. It just so happened to be a particularly cold winter, so I informed my landlord that if he wanted to persist with his demands, I would be inclined to leave all of the windows open, crank the heat as high as it would go, open the refrigerator door, run the water 24/7, etc. And if he entered the apartment without my permission to turn any of these items off, I would report him to the police. I got confirmation that he would not pursue the extra month's rent or security deposit within 20 minutes. Edit, just so everyone knows how the story ended, this happened around December of 2016, if I remember correctly, and I did get my security deposit back, etc. I did not pursue legal options because I didn't think it would end up being worth the time and trouble, though I understand the sentiment. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Since this story deals with guns, I feel the need to point out first that I live in a state where I can open carry and I have a permit for my gun. Safety is my #1 concern, so my biggest rule is that nobody touches my gun except for me. Not my friends, not my wife, and certainly not strangers. I keep it on my hip and most of the time my shirt covers it up, so it is not that noticeable. Even so, guns are pretty common around here, so even seeing it does not usually cause any problems. Now, my neighbor has a kid that I personally think is a little bit out of control. I can always hear screaming and him running around outside like a maniac. I've seen him run into a tree before and act like nothing happened. I don't have kids though, so maybe this is just how 7-year-olds act nowadays. His mother is her own type of menace that wants the world to bend over backwards for her son. If he is playing in the street with his friends, she expects cars to go down a different road instead of making them get out of the way. One day I was doing yard work and the kid was outside playing with his friends. That was when he must have looked over and spotted my gun against my hip. I don't know what they were playing, and honestly I didn't even notice them until he came up to me and pulled on the leg of my pants. Even though I did not like this kid, I was not gonna be rude to a child, so I stopped what I was doing to see what he wanted. Me? Hey there, everything okay? Child? I wanna play with my friends. Can we borrow that so I can pretend to be a bank robber? He points right at my gun. Me? I'm sorry buddy, but that's not a toy. You cannot play with it. Kid? But I wanna play with it and you are not even using it. Me? It is dangerous. You cannot play with it. He goes running off and I have a bad feeling in my gut that something is gonna happen. I don't want to deal with his mother seeing my gun and starting a bunch of crap, so I take it off and go to the other side of my backyard and then put it away with my tools. It is nowhere near anybody and my dog is near there and would bark if there's a problem. I was right about my gut and his mother came right up to me with a face like she had just swallowed a lemon. Why did you tell my little angel no? He is crying now because of you. Me? Ma'am, he wanted me to give him my gun to play with. Mother? So? Let the boy play. Me? It's not a toy. This is a real gun that he can very easily hurt or even kill somebody with. Mother? I'm his mother and I said that he can play with it. Now hand it over to him right now. Me? Lady, you're actually crazy if you think I'm gonna give your demon child my gun. Get the hell off my property. She storms away and this time I actually think that things are settled. My gut had let me down this time because it turns out that my neighbor was not done trying to F with me. I had gone back to doing yard work and about 45 minutes later I hear my dog barking like crazy. That is not normal, so I stop and run over only to hear a gunshot ring out. I get to my backyard and see that she had stolen my gun, and when my dog tried to alert me, she shot him. I did not even care or think about the fact that she was armed. I walked right up to her and grabbed my gun back from her hands. I started screaming and calling her every name in the book I could think of. Anything short of putting my hands on her, you can bet that I said, and had her running off back to her house. I called the police and tended to my dog, who was luckily alive. She was a bad shot and ended up just getting him in the leg. It was still bad though, and I wanted to get him to the vet hospital as soon as I could. The police came, and when I quickly explained what happened, they then let me go so I could take care of my dog. The good news is that he was gonna be okay, and they got the bleeding to stop and removed the bullet. He was more upset at having to wear a cone to not lick the leg for a while than anything else. The bill was a lot, but I already planned on suing Karen for the money, in addition to the fact that police were 100% arresting her for animal abuse and misuse of a firearm. Civil court would have to wait until much later, but I did end up winning the money for the entire vet bill. I just wanted to gloss over that because I find the criminal charges much more interesting. She did not have any kind of gun permit, so just shooting the gun in general was illegal. Heck, probably even holding it was gonna be a charge, and of course shooting my dog got her a charge of animal abuse on top of that. Now, these two things alone were not actually gonna be enough to put her in jail, and she would have mostly ended up with community service or maybe house arrest. Digging deeper into her life though, they found something else to charge her with, and it related back to her son. Since she seemed to cater to her child, that meant he did not have to do anything he did not want to. That extended to things like going to school, where his mom just would not make him go. He did not have to see a doctor or a dentist or really anything that kids usually need. That plus a lot of empty alcohol containers in the house made it so they could charge her with criminal child neglect. That was something she could and did end up going to jail for, with the other charges stacking up against her as well. She didn't even try to deny not taking care of the kid properly, and said that if he didn't want to do things, then he didn't have to. It's kind of hard to blame this behavior when that is what his mother brought him up thinking. So anyway, she went to jail, and the kid ended up getting adopted by some other members of the family that would have a close eye kept on them. I honestly hope that being in a different household teaches him some things about the right parent-child dynamics. I can only assume that her plan was to take the loaded gun and hand it off to her child. Then my dog scared her, and she ended up shooting him before she could get away with stealing it fully. I hate to think what would have happened if the kid actually ended up with a gun and played with it. And yeah, ripe stars, actually it makes me kind of angry to see that people like this have children and that kids have to grow up in a household like this. Therefore, I'm quite glad that the kid is now growing up somewhere else, and I hope this Karen won't see the light of day anytime soon. And the next one is titled Puppies and Neighbors. A stray dog in our neighborhood had puppies about 2 months ago. She is usually fed and cared for by the residents, and when the puppies were born, my next door neighbor decided to keep them in her front yard. Several of us in the area took turns providing food for the puppers while we looked for good homes for them. Now it is understandable for children to want to see and play with the puppies. Most of the kids in our neighborhood are well behaved and only admire the puppy from a distance. All except the spawn of the couple that lives across the street from me. Their kids are the definition of hellspawn. They are known to bully other kids and their parents instead of reprimanding them. Actually, they defended their crappy behavior. One time, they actually made the victim of their kids' bullying apologize to them. I had made a post about it a few months ago. Anyway, my neighbor, the one who sheltered the puppies, was dreading having to deal with that family. Our fears were realized when one day some of the puppies were playing right in front of the front gate of my neighbor's home. One of the hellspawns saw them and came running. He rang the doorbell and demanded that my neighbor let him in. The poor lady really didn't want to subject the puppies to their rough housing and told him that they were still too little and she would let him play with them only if he got his parents and promised to be gentle. The kid soon returned with his mom and his sister. The mom demanded that her kids be allowed to play with the puppy, as it was unfair that the other kids got to interact with them instead. My neighbor asked the mom to please explain to her kid that puppies are delicate. The mom just brushed it off and told her not to worry. The kids then entered and things turned ugly really quick. The kids grabbed the puppies roughly, made loud noises at them, and when my neighbor tried to tell them to take it easy, they just ignored her. Her tipping point came when the boy grabbed one of the puppies by the ear and the poor thing yelped. She later told me that all this happened in about a minute. She finally asked them to leave and told their mother that this is why her kids were not invited to play with the puppies. The mom flew into a rage and started yelling about how her kids were being bullied. Her banshee-like screaming was heard by the other residents, including me, and we came out of our homes and collectively told her to get her kids away from the puppies. As she was now outnumbered, she decided to retreat. It still boggles my mind that entitled parents think it's okay for their kids to bully small animals and actually get offended when called out for it. But don't worry, this happened nearly a month ago and it was the last time those brats got near the puppies. The puppies, all 5 of them, have gone to good homes. Different story from the same neighbors. I, female 38, I am fortunate enough to be surrounded by wonderful people in my neighborhood. Most of them are kind, respectful people that anyone would be happy to interact with. But of course, there's always that bad apple. The family who lives across the street from me has a mom and a dad who are the definition of entitled parents. I have many anecdotes of their crappy behavior and will be sharing them here with you. The first story I would like to share was actually narrated to me by my next door neighbor when I first moved into my house. I suppose she was trying to warn me, and today I can see why. I'm gonna call the entitled mom and dad EM and ED, yeah that's creative, and her kids EK1, the girl, and EK2, the boy. This incident happened over 3 years ago. The couple that lives right next door to EM is quite elderly. They are both retired but are still quite active and often babysit the small children in the neighborhood as a favor. Back then, EM and her family had just moved in and their crappiness was not yet known. The nice elderly couple, I will call them Mr. and Mrs. Awesome, went over to their home and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They told EM and ED that if they ever wanted their kids looked after, when they were not there, they, Mr. and Mrs. Awesome, would be happy to do so. About a month after that, EM asked Mrs. Awesome to watch the kids for the day as she and her husband would be visiting the family. The elderly couple agreed. They took EK1 and 2 to their home where a few of the other neighbors were also there. EK1 had cruelly mocked a little girl, the child of another neighbor, while at Mr. and Mrs. Awesome's house. The poor girl had started crying. The elderly couple told her off gently, and when EM and ED came to pick up their kids, they had a talk with them as well. I am told that they explained to EM and ED in a very patient manner that this was not just kids being kids and that the little girl who had been bullied was sensitive about her stutter, so EK1 was asked to apologize, which she did. One would think that this would be the end of it, but one does not think like an entitled a-hole. A few weeks after this incident was one of the EK birthdays. I honestly cannot remember which one. EM decided to invite the little girl with a stutter. The girl's parents must have thought this was a goodwill gesture. The child went to the birthday party none of the wiser of what awaited her. When the little girl's parents came to pick her up, the child was in tears. Her eyes were swollen. You see, the EM had ambushed the girl. She got the child to stand in the middle of the room and told the other kids that she was a liar who had gotten EK1 in trouble. EM then asked the little girl to apologize to EK1 right there in front of the people. The little girl tried to tell her side of the story, but then her stutter wouldn't let her speak clearly. The other kids at the party laughed at her and she was humiliated. This was EM's idea of revenge on a child who had been bullied by her kid. When the girl's parents confronted EM got defensive and told them their daughter was a drama queen and trying to get attention. Some more words were exchanged and it was the last time the child went to EM's home. Mr. and Mrs. Awesome were aghast when they heard about this and gave EM an earful. They also stopped babysitting EK1 and EK2. This is only one example of this entitled couple's monstrous behavior. There's so much more. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.